A divorced mom bought a haunted cabin for $500, then her German Shepherd found a secret no one dared to open. She thought it was just a cheap escape, a rundown cabin where she could start over. But the locals warned her it wasn't just abandoned, it was cursed. On her first night, the dog wouldn't stop growling. And then she heard its chains rattling beneath the floorboards. What she found was more than dust and cobwebs. Hidden inside was a locked chest, and inside that chest, a truth buried for generations. A truth that could shatter her family or finally heal it. Because this wasn't just about a haunted cabin, it was about a long-lost bride, a missing child, and a family secret that refused to stay hidden. So, what did the dog uncover in that chest, and why had no one dared to open it until now? Let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. If you like stories that connect us, don't forget to subscribe before you leave. The late October sun cast long shadows across the county courthouse steps as Nicole Dawson shifted uncomfortably in her metal folding chair. Her German Shepherd, Duke, lay at her feet, his warm presence providing comfort in the unfamiliar setting. She absently stroked his thick fur, her fingers trembling slightly as she clutched the bidding paddle marked number 23 in her other hand. The auction room buzzed with quiet conversation, mostly locals who seemed to know each other well. Nicole felt like an outsider, drawing curious glances from the regulars, who probably wondered what brought a newcomer to their small-town property auction. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer's voice boomed through the room. We have the old Morrison cabin, located 3 miles outside town on Cedar Creek Road. He cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Starting bid at $500. Nicole's heart skipped a beat. She'd driven past that cabin countless times over the years, a sturdy log structure set back from the road, partially hidden by towering pine trees. The price seemed impossibly low for any kind of housing, even one in need of repair. The room fell silent. Not a single paddle raised. The auctioneer tried again, his voice holding a note of desperation. Folks, that's $500 for over 2 acres of land in a solid log cabin. Any takers? Someone behind Nicole whispered. Wouldn't take that place if they paid me to live there. Another voice responded. Bad business, that cabin. Better left alone. Duke's ears perked up at the murmuring, and he lifted his head to look at Nicole with those intelligent brown eyes. Something about his steady gaze gave her courage. Before she could second-guess herself, Nicole's paddle shot up into the air. $500 from number 23, the auctioneer called out, relief evident in his voice. He waited a moment, scanning the room. Going once, going twice. Sold to the lady with the German Shepherd. Nicole's hands shook as she signed the paperwork and handed over her cashier's check. She had just bought a house, her first major purchase since the divorce. The thought sent equal waves of excitement and terror through her. As she gathered her things to leave, an elderly man touched her elbow. Miss, he said, his weathered face creased with concern. That place has a history best left alone. You might want to reconsider. Thank you for your concern, Nicole replied politely, though her stomach tightened at his words. But I need a fresh start, and this is what I can afford. Duke stood alert at her side as more locals approached, each bearing similar warnings. Their words carried weight, but Nicole wouldn't, let fear stop her now. She had spent too many years living cautiously, only to have her marriage crumble anyway. Later that afternoon, Nicole drove her aging Honda down the bumpy dirt road leading to her new property. Duke sat in the bumpy passenger seat, his nose pressed against the window. The autumn leaves created a tunnel of red and gold, but as they approached the cabin, the trees grew denser and darker. The cabin finally came into view, and Nicole's breath caught in her throat. It looked more imposing up close, logs darkened with age, moss creeping across the cedar shake roof. Several windows were cracked or broken, their jagged edges catching the fading sunlight. The small front porch sagged slightly, its floorboards green with algae. Well, it needs work, Nicole said aloud, trying to sound more confident than she felt. But it's ours, Duke. She parked in front of the cabin and got out, gripping Duke's leash tightly. The moment their feet hit the ground, Duke's demeanor changed. His ears flattened against his head, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. What is it, boy? Nicole asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Duke was never aggressive without cause. His reaction sent chills down her spine. The wind had died completely, leaving an unnatural stillness in the air. Dead leaves crunched under their feet as Nicole approached the front door, fishing the old brass key from her pocket. Duke's growling grew louder with each step, but he stayed protectively close to her side. The key felt ice cold in her hand as she inserted it into the lock. It turned with surprising ease, as if it had been recently oiled. Nicole took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. "Well, this is home now," she whispered, pushing the door open and stepping inside with Duke. Before she could reach for the light switch, the door slammed shut behind them with a thunderous bang that echoed through the empty rooms. Nicole spun around, her heart pounding. There had been no wind, no draft, nothing that could have caused the door to close with such force. She stood frozen in the darkness, Duke's warm body pressed against her legs, his growl now a constant warning rumble in the shadows of what was supposed to be her fresh start. The darkness pressed in around Nicole until she fumbled for her flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating dancing dust motes and thick cobwebs that draped from the ceiling like tattered lace. Her footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, each board creaking a protest beneath her feet. "Let's see what we've got here," she murmured, more to calm herself than for Duke's benefit. The German Shepherd stayed close, his nails clicking against the floor as they moved deeper into the cabin. The main room was large but cluttered with broken furniture. A wooden chair lay on its side, two legs snapped off like broken bones. Water stains painted ugly brown patterns on the log walls, testament to years of neglect. As Nicole's flashlight beam swept across the floor, she noticed deep scratches in the wooden boards, not the random marks of moved furniture, but deliberate parallel lines that made her skin prickle. "Those look almost like..." She didn't finish the thought. Duke's low growl reminded her they weren't alone in the darkness. Nicole set her backpack down and pulled out some basic supplies: a battery-powered lantern, sleeping bag, and her small camp stove. The familiar tasks helped steady her nerves. Yet as she worked, Duke's behavior grew increasingly odd. He stood rigid, staring at one corner of the room where a faded area rug lay bunched against the wall. His ears were forward, tail straight, every muscle tense. "Duke, what is it?" Nicole asked, but he didn't break his focus. The growl in his throat deepened. Trying to ignore the dog's unsettling fixation, Nicole set up her camp stove on a relatively level spot near the stone fireplace. The click-click whoosh of the burner lighting seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet cabin. She heated a can of soup, the familiar smell of chicken noodle offering some comfort in the strange space. "At least we won't go hungry," she said, pouring half the soup into Duke's travel bowl. But the dog wouldn't leave his post by the corner. He didn't even glance at the food, completely out of character for him. Nicole ate quickly, the soup warming her insides even as a persistent chill seemed to seep from the cabin walls. Exhaustion from the day's events weighed heavily on her shoulders. She laid out her sleeping bag as far from the mysterious corner as possible, using her backpack as a makeshift pillow. "Come on, Duke," she patted the sleeping bag. "Time for bed." Finally, Duke broke his vigil and came to curl up beside her. Nicole clicked off the lantern, plunging the cabin into darkness, broken only by thin strips of moonlight filtering through the broken windows. Despite her racing thoughts about what tomorrow would bring, repairs, cleaning, making this place livable, sleep pulled her under quickly. Crack! Nicole jerked awake, heart pounding. Duke was no longer beside her. He stood at the corner again, barking furiously at the floor. His deep woofs echoed off the walls as he paced back and forth over the old rug. Nicole fumbled for the lantern with shaking hands. In the sudden light, she saw the rug shifting slightly, as if something underneath was moving. The floorboards rattled, a subtle vibration she could feel through her sleeping bag. Duke's barking grew more insistent, and he began pawing at the edge of the rug. "Duke, quiet," Nicole whispered, though she knew it was useless. When Duke was this worked up, something was definitely wrong. She pushed herself to her feet, legs trembling slightly as she approached the corner. Duke didn't acknowledge her. His entire focus was on whatever lay beneath that rug. Taking a deep breath, Nicole knelt beside him and grasped the edge of the dusty fabric. With one firm tug, she pulled the rug aside. The flashlight beam revealed what looked like the faint outline of a trapdoor set into the floorboards, its edges nearly invisible against the surrounding wood. "What in the world?" Nicole breathed, while Duke pawed insistently at the seams, his nails scraping against the wood as if trying to dig through to whatever secrets lay below. Pale morning light filtered through the cabin's grimy windows, casting long shadows across the weathered floorboards. Nicole stood in the corner where Duke had made his discovery, a rusty crowbar gripped tightly in her trembling hands. She'd found the tool in her car's emergency kit, never imagining she'd use it to pry open a mysterious trapdoor in her newly purchased home. Duke sat alert beside her, his ears pricked forward and body tense. His presence gave her courage, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Okay, boy," Nicole whispered, positioning the crowbar's curved end in the barely visible seam. "Here goes nothing." The wood groaned in protest as she leaned her weight against the metal. Dust puffed up from the cracks, making her cough. With a sudden crack that made her jump, the trapdoor lifted slightly. A rush of stale, cold air whispered up from the darkness below, carrying a musty scent that made Duke sneeze. Nicole worked the crowbar around the edges, loosening decades of settled wood. Finally, with one last heave, the trapdoor swung upward. The hinges screamed, the sound echoing through the quiet cabin. Reaching for her flashlight, Nicole aimed the beam into the opening. The light revealed rough-hewn steps leading down into a small cellar. But what caught her attention was the large wooden chest pushed against the far wall. Even from above, she could see it was no ordinary storage box. Heavy iron bands wrapped around its sides, studded with thick metal bolts that had gone green with age. "Stay," she commanded Duke, though he whined in protest as she carefully descended the stairs. Each step creaked ominously under her weight. The cellar air was sharp with cold, despite the summer warmth above. Nicole's breath came out in visible puffs as she approached the chest. A heavy chain wrapped around it, secured with a padlock that gleamed oddly in her flashlight beam. Unlike everything else in the cellar, the lock showed no signs of age or rust. In fact, it looked recently oiled. "That's strange," Nicole muttered, reaching out to touch the metal. Her fingers came away slightly greasy. Someone had been down here, and recently. A sudden snarl from above made her jump. Duke stood at the top of the stairs, hackles raised, teeth bared. She'd never seen him look so fierce. "What is it, boy?" she called, but he only growled louder, eyes fixed on the chest. Nicole turned back to examine it more closely. The beam of her flashlight revealed something that made her blood run cold. Deep grooves scarred the wooden lid, running in parallel lines. Her mind flashed to the similar marks she'd seen on the floor above. But these were different, more desperate. They looked like finger marks, as if someone had clawed frantically at the wood. From the inside, her hands shook as she ran her fingers over the gouges. They were deep, splintering the wood. The thought of someone being trapped in here, fighting to get out. Duke's barking grew frantic. The sound snapped Nicole out of her horrified trance. She scrambled up the stairs, nearly tripping in her haste. The moment she cleared the opening, Duke nudged her away from it, positioning himself between her and the trapdoor. "Good boy," she gasped, patting his head with trembling fingers. "Let's close this up." The trapdoor fell shut with a heavy thud that seemed to echo through her bones. Nicole dragged the rug back over it, trying to erase the evidence of what lay below. But she couldn't shake the image of those desperate claw marks. As evening approached, Nicole knew she needed answers. She couldn't stay another night in the cabin without knowing more about its history. Duke seemed relieved when they got in the car, though he kept looking back at the cabin until it disappeared from view. The small town's main street was quiet, most shops already closed for the day. But light still spilled from the windows of Wilson's General Store. A bell tinkled as Nicole pushed open the door, breathing in the familiar scent of coffee and penny candy. Behind the counter, an elderly man with thick glasses looked up from his newspaper. His welcoming smile faded slightly when she introduced herself as the new owner of the old Thompson cabin. "I was hoping you could tell me something about the cabin's history," Nicole said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I found some unusual things there." The old man's face closed off completely. He began wiping down the already clean counter, avoiding her eyes. "That place has been empty a long time. Not much to tell." "Please," Nicole pressed. "I need to know what happened there. Why was it abandoned?" His movements stilled. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he muttered, "It was hers, the bride who vanished." "Whose? What bride?" Nicole leaned forward eagerly, but the old man shook his head firmly. "Store's closing now," he said, turning away. "Best head home before dark." Nicole tried to ask more questions, but he disappeared into the back room, leaving her alone with the cooling coffee pot and rows of silent merchandise. The drive back seemed longer, darker. Her headlights cut through the gathering dusk, throwing strange shadows among the trees. When the cabin finally came into view, it looked different somehow, more menacing. The windows were dark holes in the log walls, and for a moment, Nicole could have sworn she saw movement behind one of them. Duke pressed against her leg as she parked, his low growl matching her own unease. The headlights swept across the cabin's face one last time before she turned off the engine. plunging everything into darkness. The morning sun filtered through the cabin's grimy windows as Nicole pulled on her work gloves. She'd spent the last 3 days avoiding the cellar and its mysterious chest, throwing herself instead into cleaning and repairs. Duke lay near the door, watching her every move with alert eyes. "Time to tackle these walls," she said, testing a piece of water-damaged paneling. It came away easily in her hands, revealing dark wood underneath. The whole wall would need to come down. As she worked, sweat beading on her forehead, Nicole found herself grateful for the physical labor. It kept her mind off the mysteries below. The rotting panels fell away in chunks, filling the room with the musty smell of old wood and decay. "Look at this mess," she muttered to Duke, who had perked up and was sniffing intently at the exposed wall. "What is it, boy?" Nicole shone her flashlight into the gap between the studs. Something white caught her eye. Papers, wedged deep in the wall cavity. Reaching carefully into the space, her fingers touched what felt like old envelopes, brittle with age. She pulled them out gently, disturbing decades of dust. They were letters, at least 20 of them, their edges charred as if someone had tried to burn them. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded but still legible. The top envelope bore a military post office address from World War II. Nicole's hands trembled as she opened the first letter. The handwriting was delicate, feminine. "My dearest James, another week has passed without word from you. I pray every night for your safety. The baby kicks more now. I like to think he knows his father is fighting for our future." "These are love letters," Nicole whispered to Duke, who had come to sit beside her. She read through them one by one, each telling the story of a young wife named Evelyn, writing to her soldier husband overseas. The letters spoke of hope, of loneliness, of a future together after the war. But as Nicole progressed through the stack, the tone began to change. Evelyn's words grew increasingly worried, then frightened. "Your parents watch my every move now. They say it's for my own good, but I feel like a prisoner here. Your mother takes all the mail before I can see it. I don't know if my letters are reaching you anymore." Nicole's heart ached as she read. She could feel Evelyn's growing desperation in every word. The final letter made her blood run cold. "My darling James, I fear this will be my last letter. They are watching me. I don't think I'll be here when you return. I've heard them talking. They plan to take our baby. I won't let them. I have to leave, to protect our child. Please forgive me. I'll find a way to let you know we're safe. All my love, Evelyn." None of the letters had ever been mailed. They'd been hidden away, secret testimonies to a young woman's fear and courage. Nicole sat back against the wall. Letters spread around her like fallen leaves. Something about Evelyn's words resonated deeply within her. The fear of losing everything. The desperate need to protect what mattered most. "I know how you felt, Evelyn," Nicole whispered, touching the fragile paper. Her own divorce had left her feeling similarly trapped and powerless. But Evelyn's situation had been far more dire. As evening settled over the cabin, Nicole couldn't bear to put the letters away. She sat in her camp chair, Duke at her feet, and began reading them aloud by lantern light. Her voice filled the quiet room with Evelyn's words of love and longing. "The spring flowers are blooming now," she read from an early letter. "I wish you could see them, James. I've planted a garden like we talked about." Duke's head suddenly snapped up, his ears pricked forward. Nicole paused in her reading, listening. The cabin seemed unusually still. "I miss you so much," she continued, her voice slightly shakier. "Sometimes, I imagine I can hear your footsteps." A sound from below made her stop again. It was faint at first, a slight scraping noise. Then came the unmistakable clinking of metal on metal. The chains in the cellar were moving. Duke leapt to his feet, growling. Nicole's heart pounded as the sounds grew louder. The chest was rattling violently now. She could hear it clearly through the floorboards. The chains clinked and scraped, as if being dragged by invisible hands. A gasp escaped her lips as the noise reached a crescendo. Duke's barking echoed through the cabin, mixing with the supernatural cacophony from below. The letters trembled in Nicole's frozen hands, Evelyn's words seeming to pulse with new meaning in the darkness. Nicole barely slept that night, tossing and turning in her sleeping bag as questions about Evelyn and the mysterious chest plagued her thoughts. Duke stayed alert beside her, his warm body pressed against her side, offering silent comfort through the long hours. The first hints of dawn crept through the cabin's grimy windows, painting the wooden walls in soft golden light. Nicole had made up her mind. She couldn't bear another day of not knowing what lay within that chained chest. "Come on, boy," she whispered to Duke, who immediately perked up his ears. Her hands trembled as she reached for the flashlight she'd kept close all night. The beam cut through the morning shadows as she approached the trapdoor, its outline now familiar beneath the pulled-back rug. Duke padded beside her, his nails clicking softly on the wooden floor. His usual protective growl was absent this morning, replaced by an attentive curiosity that somehow made Nicole feel braver. She knelt beside the trapdoor, running her fingers along its rough edges. The hinges creaked loudly in protest as she lifted it, the sound echoing through the quiet cabin. Cold air wafted up from below, carrying the musty scent of age and secrets. Nicole's heart thundered in her chest as she directed the flashlight beam downward. The chest sat exactly as she'd left it, its iron-studded surface gleaming dully in the artificial light. Those disturbing claw marks seemed even more pronounced in the morning shadows, telling their own silent story of desperation. "Here goes nothing," she murmured, more to steady herself than anything else. Duke pressed against her leg as she reached down with trembling fingers to touch the chest's weathered surface. The padlock was surprisingly smooth under her touch, its mechanism moving easily despite its age. Nicole had found a ring of old keys in the kitchen drawer yesterday, and now she pulled them out with shaking hands. The third key she tried slid perfectly into the lock. Her pulse raced as she turned the key, hearing the solid click of the mechanism releasing. The chain slithered away with a metallic whisper that made her skin crawl. Remembering their inexplicable movement the night before, Nicole hesitated, her hand resting on the lid. What horrors might she find inside? The claw marks suggested something terrible. She thought of Evelyn's frightened words in those final letters, and for a moment, her imagination conjured the worst possibilities. Drawing a deep breath, she lifted the lid just enough to create a narrow gap. The hinges protested with a long, low groan that made Duke's ears twitch. Nicole aimed her flashlight through the opening, bracing herself for whatever she might discover. The beam revealed something unexpected, not the grotesque scenes she'd feared, but neat stacks of what appeared to be photographs. They were carefully arranged, their edges aligned with surprising precision, as if whoever had placed them there had taken great care with their preservation. Relief flooded through her as she opened the lid fully. The chest was lined with soft fabric, protecting its contents from decay. She reached in and gently lifted the top photograph, noting how perfectly preserved it was, despite its obvious age. The black and white image showed a group of people standing in front of a house. This very cabin, she realized, though it looked much newer. Her eyes scanned the faces, taking in the period clothing and serious expressions typical of old photographs. She set it aside and picked up another. This one showed a young woman in a wedding dress, her smile radiant despite the photograph's age. "Evelyn," Nicole whispered, recognizing the face from her imagination as she'd read the letters. The next photograph made her breath catch in her throat. Her hands began to shake so badly she nearly dropped it. The image showed two little girls standing in front of a flowering garden. One was unfamiliar, but the other, Nicole would know that face anywhere. She had seen it in countless family albums. It was her mother as a young child, no more than 5 or 6 years old. And standing beside her, holding her hand with a protective grip, was a woman Nicole now recognized as Evelyn. The room seemed to spin as Nicole stared at the impossible image. Her mother had never mentioned knowing Evelyn or having any connection to this cabin. Yet here was undeniable proof, captured in black and white, that their families had been linked. She turned the photograph over with unsteady fingers. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, "Margaret and Eve, Spring 1948. Margaret, her mother's name. The date placed this just a few years after those final desperate letters. Duke whined softly beside her, pressing his nose against her arm as if sensing her distress. Nicole barely noticed, too absorbed in the shocking revelation before her. Her fingers traced the outline of her young mother's face in the photograph. How is this even possible?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The questions seemed to hang in the musty air of the cabin, unanswered. Duke whined again, more insistently this time, his brown eyes fixed on her face with concern. The photograph trembled in her hands as the implications began to sink in. This wasn't just some random cabin she'd bought at auction. Somehow, impossibly, she had stumbled upon a place that held secret pieces of her own family history. The chest's contents weren't just Evelyn's story, they were part of her story too. Duke pressed closer, his warm presence anchoring her as she sat there, staring at the image that had just turned her world upside down. The morning light continued to strengthen outside, but Nicole remained frozen, the photograph in her shaking hands connecting her to a past she'd never known existed. Nicole's fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel as she pulled into the library parking lot. The small brick building hadn't changed since her childhood visits. Same weathered steps, same creaky wooden doors, same faded sign. But today, she wasn't here for books. She was here for answers. Inside, the familiar smell of old paper and wood polish wrapped around her like a comfortable blanket. A young librarian looked up from her computer, smiling. "Can I help you find something?" "I'm looking for Elias," Nicole said softly. "I heard he keeps the Old Town records?" The librarian's expression softened with understanding. "Oh yes, mister. Elias is in his usual spot, back corner, near the local history section." Nicole followed the directions, weaving through towering shelves until she reached a secluded reading area. There, hunched over a large leather-bound volume, sat an elderly man. His weathered hands moved carefully across the yellowed pages, treating them with the gentleness one might show a precious artifact. "Excuse me," Nicole whispered. "Are you Elias?" The old man looked up, his bright blue eyes sharp despite his fragile appearance. He studied her for a long moment before answering. "Depends who's asking." Nicole pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. "My name is Nicole Dawson. I recently bought the old cabin outside town, and I—" "Dawson?" Elias interrupted, his voice suddenly alert. "Any relation to the Dawsons who owned that place during the war?" I'm not sure," Nicole admitted. "That's partly why I'm here. I found some things in the cabin, letters, photographs. They belonged to a woman named Evelyn Dawson." The change in Elias's demeanor was immediate. His shoulders tensed, and he carefully closed the book he'd been reading. "Young lady, some stories are better left in the past." But Nicole wasn't deterred. She reached into her bag and pulled out one of the photographs, sliding it across the table. "Please. I found this picture of my mother as a child, standing with Evelyn. I need to understand." Elias's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the photograph. He stared at it for a long time, his expression growing distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Evelyn Dawson. Now there's a name I haven't heard spoken aloud in many years." He leaned back in his chair, eyes still fixed on the photograph. She was a beautiful soul, kind, gentle. Married young to Thomas Dawson before he shipped out to the Pacific. Nicole leaned forward, hanging on every word. "What happened to her?" Elias sighed heavily. "Thomas was declared missing in action in 1945. His parents, controlling people, they couldn't accept it. Kept insisting he'd come home." He paused, his weathered face clouding with old memories. "They had plans for Evelyn." "What kind of plans?" "They'd arranged to marry her off to Thomas's younger brother, Andrew. Claimed it was for her own good, to keep her provided for." Elias's voice hardened. "But those of us who saw her in those days, we knew she was trapped." The light in her eyes had gone out. Nicole thought of the letters she'd found, the growing fear in Evelyn's words. "She tried to escape, didn't she?" Elias nodded slowly. "That was always my belief. One morning, she was simply gone. The Dawsons claimed she'd run off with another man, but I never believed that. Not Evelyn." He looked at Nicole intently. She was carrying Thomas's child when he shipped out. Nobody ever knew what happened to that baby. Nicole's heart pounded as she connected the pieces. The photograph of her mother with Evelyn, dated years after the disappearance. Could it be possible? "Mr. Elias," she said carefully, "these letters I found, they were hidden in the walls. The last one, she wrote about being watched, about not being there when Thomas returned." The old man's face grew grave. "Listen to me carefully, child. That cabin." He reached across the table, his papery hand gripping hers with surprising strength. "It holds secrets that some powerful people would prefer stayed buried. Dark things happen there, things that still echo." "What kinds of things?" But Elias shook his head, withdrawing his hand. "Don't stir old ghosts, child. That cabin swallows people whole. I've watched it happen before." His eyes took on a haunted look. "Some mysteries are better left unsolved." Nicole gathered her materials slowly, processing everything she'd learned. As she stood to leave, Elias spoke again, his voice urgent. "Be careful, Nicole Dawson. You're not the first to go looking for answers about Evelyn. Others have tried. They didn't fare well." The drive back to the cabin seemed longer than usual, the setting sun painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. Nicole had spread the letters and photographs across the passenger seat, unable to stop glancing at them. Her mind raced with questions. What had really happened to Evelyn? What was the connection to her mother? Movement in her rearview mirror caught her attention. Headlights appeared behind her, following at a steady distance. She told herself it was nothing. Plenty of people use this road. But something about the way the car maintained the exact same distance made her uneasy. Nicole turned off onto a side road, one that didn't lead to the cabin. The headlights followed. Her heart began to race. She made another turn, then another, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. When she looked in the mirror again, the headlights were gone. The road behind her was empty and dark, as if the following car had never existed. Nicole let out a shaky breath, trying to calm her nerves. But Elias's warning echoed in her mind. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. She continued her drive home, constantly checking her mirrors, but the mysterious car never reappeared. The letters and photographs seemed to whisper to her from the passenger seat, promising answers while warning of dangers. As the last light faded from the sky, Nicole couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stepped into something much bigger and much more dangerous than she'd imagined. The cabin's front door groaned as Nicole stepped inside, her arms full of the materials from her visit with Elias. Duke padded in behind her, his nails clicking against the wooden floor. She settled cross-legged on the threadbare rug, spreading the photographs from the chest in a semicircle around her. Her fingers trembled as she sorted through them under the warm glow of her battery-powered lantern. Black and white images captured moments frozen in time, summer picnics, church gatherings, family portraits. In most of them, Evelyn's smile seemed strained, her eyes holding a sadness that Nicole recognized all too well from her own mirror. Then she found it, a photograph that made her breath catch. Evelyn sat in a wooden rocking chair, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in white. Her face was different here, genuinely joyful, looking down at her newborn with pure love. Nicole turned the photo over. On the back, written in careful script, "Elizabeth, 3 days old. Elizabeth," Nicole whispered. Duke's ears perked up at the sound. Nobody ever mentioned a baby Duke. Not Elias, not the town records, nothing. She returned to the trapdoor, lifting it with purpose now. The chest sat below, its iron studs gleaming in the lantern light. This time, she lifted the photographs out carefully, setting them aside. Beneath them, something soft and white caught her eye. Nicole reached in, her fingers brushing against fabric that felt delicate as a spider's web. With gentle hands, she lifted out a baptismal gown, yellowed with age but still pristine. The handwork was exquisite, tiny pintucks and delicate lace, each stitch speaking of a mother's love and hope. "She didn't just vanish," Nicole murmured, smoothing the small garment across her lap. "She escaped with her baby. She had to protect Elizabeth." Duke whined softly, pressing against her side. Nicole wrapped an arm around him, drawing comfort from his solid warmth. The parallels to her own life struck her deeply. Another woman facing impossible choices, fighting to protect what mattered most. Her own divorce had left her reeling, struggling to rebuild a life from scattered pieces. She'd fought to protect her children's stability, their sense of security, even as her own world crumbled. Now, holding this delicate gown, she felt a profound connection to Evelyn across the decades. She couldn't let them control her baby's future, Nicole said softly, picturing Evelyn packing these precious items away, perhaps knowing she might never return for them. "Just like I couldn't let my ex-husband's choices destroy our children's lives." The baptismal gown seemed to glow in the lantern light, its whiteness standing out against the cabin's shadowy interior. Nicole carefully folded it, noting how the fabric naturally fell into well-worn creases, as if it had been packed and unpacked many times, perhaps as Evelyn planned her escape. Duke suddenly lifted his head, ears forward. A moment later, Nicole heard it too, the unmistakable sound of footsteps creaking across the floor above them. Slow, deliberate steps, moving from one end of the upstairs to the other. Her heart began to pound. She knew she was alone in the cabin, the only entrance was the front door, and Duke would have alerted her to any intruder. Yet the footsteps continued, each creak of the floorboards crystal clear in the evening quiet. Nicole's hand shook as she grabbed the lantern. "Come on, Duke," she whispered, rising to her feet. The German Shepherd pressed close to her leg, alert but not aggressive, unusual for him if he sensed a genuine threat. The stairs loomed before them, disappearing into darkness. Each step seemed to groan under their weight as they began to climb, Duke leading the way. The lantern's beam caught dust motes dancing in the air, and shadows seemed to shift and move at the edges of its light. The footsteps had stopped, but the air felt heavy with expectation. Nicole reached the top of the stairs, her free hand gripping Duke's collar. Her heart thundered so loudly, she was sure it must be echoing through the empty rooms. Duke's fur was smooth under her fingers. No raised hackles, no growling. Whatever awaited them in the darkness ahead, he seemed unafraid. Nicole took a deep breath, lifted the lantern higher, and stepped forward into the upstairs hallway. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, the same sound she'd heard from below. But now, in the thick silence, each step seemed to whisper stories of those who had walked here before her. Nicole stepped into the attic, her lantern casting dancing shadows across rough-hewn beams. Dust motes swirled in the golden light like tiny stars, disturbed by their presence after years of stillness. The air felt thick and close, heavy with the musty scent of forgotten things. Duke padded beside her, his nails clicking softly on the wooden floor. The space stretched before them, filled with the hulking shapes of old trunks and furniture draped in yellowed sheets. Cobwebs hung like tattered lace from the rafters, and somewhere in the darkness, water dripped with a steady plink. "Hello?" Nicole called out softly, though she wasn't sure why she whispered. The lantern light caught the edges of things: a broken rocking chair, stacked boxes tied with fraying twine, an ancient mirror clouded with age. But no person, no explanation for the footsteps that had led them here. She moved deeper into the attic, touching an old trunk with careful fingers. The brass fixtures were green with age, its leather straps cracked and brittle. Another trunk beside it gaped open, spilling moth-eaten quilts onto the floor. Everything spoke of abandonment, of stories left untold. A sudden gust of wind rattled the single window at the far end of the attic. Duke's head snapped toward the sound, his body going rigid. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not his usual warning bark, but something deeper, more primal. Nicole swung the lantern toward the window. Her heart nearly stopped. There, framed in the grimy glass, was a face, just for a moment, pale and desperate. Then it vanished, and she caught the movement of a figure darting into the woods beyond the cabin. "Hey!" she shouted, but the figure was already disappearing between the trees. Duke's growl turned to furious barking as he lunged toward the window, nearly pulling free from her grip on his collar. "Easy, boy," she soothed, though her own heart was racing. Someone had been watching them. Someone had been in her house. Fear propelled her toward the stairs, Duke charging ahead. They clattered down to the main floor, where Nicole stopped short, the lantern beam illuminating something that made her blood run cold. The trap door lay open. She was certain she'd closed it after finding the baptismal gown. Now it gaped wide, like a mouth waiting to swallow secrets. Nicole approached cautiously, Duke still growling beside her. The chest below showed fresh scratches around its lock. Long, desperate marks where someone had tried to force it open. "They want what's inside," she whispered, kneeling to examine the damage. "They're trying to get to Evelyn's secrets before we can uncover them." The realization transformed her fear into something else: determination. She thought of Evelyn, young and alone, hiding her treasures away. Thought of that baby, Elizabeth, whose fate remained unknown. These weren't just artifacts, they were pieces of a life, of a mother's love and sacrifice. "No," Nicole said firmly, closing the trap door with decisive hands. "I won't let anyone steal this story. Not now. Not when we're so close to understanding." Duke's barking had subsided to alert watchfulness, his ears still pricked toward the window. Nicole gathered the scattered photographs from where she'd left them, handling each one with reverence. The one of Evelyn and baby Elizabeth she held longest, studying the joy in the young mother's face. Moving quickly, she dragged a heavy wooden chair across the floor, wedging it firmly under the cabin's front door handle. It wasn't much, but it would warn her if anyone tried to enter. She checked each window, drawing the old curtains tight. Finally, she settled into the chair, Duke lying protectively at her feet. The photograph of Evelyn and Elizabeth rested in her lap as she stared into the gathering darkness outside. "I'll find you," she whispered to the image of mother and child. "I promise. Whatever happened to you both, I'll make sure your story isn't lost again." Duke's tail thumped once against the floor, as if agreeing. Together, they kept watch as night settled over the cabin, the woods beyond holding their secrets close. The county courthouse loomed against the pre-dawn sky, its weathered brick facade tinged purple in the early light. Nicole stood at the bottom of the wide stone steps, clutching a thermos of coffee and watching as a sleepy-looking clerk unlocked the heavy wooden doors. She'd barely slept after the incident with the intruder, spending most of the night going through Evelyn's letters again and again. Now, determination pushed away her exhaustion as she climbed the steps, her footsteps echoing in the empty building. Records room? She asked the clerk, who pointed her down a long hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced judges from decades past. The records room smelled of old paper and dust, with tall windows, letting in weak morning light. Metal filing cabinets stretched in endless rows, and ancient leather-bound volumes lined floor-to-ceiling shelves. A few reading tables sat empty, their surfaces scarred from years of use. "Can I help you find anything?" asked an elderly woman behind a desk, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. "I'm looking for marriage and birth records from the 1940s, Nicole explained. "Specifically anything related to Evelyn Dawson." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly at the name, but she nodded. "Marriage records are in those cabinets along the west wall. Birth records are in the bound volumes on the far shelves. Sign the visitor log, please." Nicole wrote her name and settled at a reading table with the first stack of records. Hours passed as she carefully turned brittle pages, scanning endless lists of names. Her coffee grew cold, forgotten, as she lost herself in the hunt. Around mid-morning, she found Evelyn's marriage certificate. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but the details were clear. Evelyn Marie Thompson, age 19, married to James William Dawson on June 12, 1943. Just weeks before he shipped out to war. Nicole traced the elegant signature with her finger. "Hello, Evelyn?" she whispered. But it was in the birth records that she found her first real breakthrough. After searching through 3 thick volumes, she discovered a birth certificate for Elizabeth Marie Dawson, born February 3, 1944. Father's name, James Dawson, listed as serving overseas. Mother's name, Evelyn Dawson. So, the baby in the photograph was Elizabeth. Nicole murmured, jotting down the details. But what had happened to them? She expanded her search to neighboring counties, requesting records through the clerk. By early afternoon, her eyes were burning from strain, but she couldn't stop. Something told her the answer was here, buried in these dusty papers. In a pile of church records from 2 counties over, she found it. Her hands trembled as she read the baptismal certificate dated 1946. The child's name was Elizabeth Marie Collins. Mother's name, Helen Collins, formerly Evelyn Dawson. Nicole's heart raced as she connected the dots. Evelyn hadn't vanished, she'd transformed herself. After James was declared missing in action, instead of submitting to her in-laws' plans to remarry her, she'd taken her baby and started fresh under a new name. More documents painted the picture. A legal name change petition, a new driver's license application, property records for a small house in a quiet town 40 miles away. Evelyn, now Helen, had carefully constructed a new life for herself and Elizabeth, leaving no trace for anyone to follow. "She was so brave," Nicole whispered, gathering the documents. Everyone thought she'd disappeared, but she was protecting her daughter the only way she knew how. The old clerk appeared beside her table. "Found what you were looking for?" Nicole nodded, still processing the revelation. She survived. They both did. Everyone thought the cabin swallowed her, but she chose to vanish. She chose freedom. The clerk's expression softened. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is walk away and start over. Especially back then, when there weren't many choices for a young widow with a baby. "Do you know what happened to them? To Helen Collins and Elizabeth?" The clerk shook her head. "Those records would be more recent. Different department. But now that you have their new names, I can keep searching," Nicole finished. She gathered her notes carefully, protecting them from the growing shadows as clouds gathered outside the tall windows. As she stepped out of the courthouse, the first fat drops of rain began to fall. Nicole tucked the precious baptismal record inside her jacket, protecting it from the weather. The paper felt warm against her heart, like a promise. Thunder rumbled in the distance, but Nicole barely noticed. Her mind was full of Evelyn, Helen, and her desperate courage. A young mother who'd sacrificed everything, even her own name and history, to give her daughter a chance at a peaceful life. The rain fell harder now, but Nicole stood for a moment on the courthouse steps, hope swelling in her chest. Somewhere out there were answers. Somewhere, perhaps, Elizabeth Collins had lived a full life, never knowing the true story of her mother's bravery. Never knowing about the cabin, the hidden chest, the desperate letters that had never been sent. "I'll find you," Nicole whispered to the rain. "Both of you. Your story deserves to be told." She clutched the baptismal record closer, feeling the weight of its revelation. Evelyn hadn't been swallowed by tragedy. She'd chosen her own path, turned fear into freedom, sacrifice into survival. In the decades-old ink and paper, Nicole felt a connection to this brave woman growing stronger, pulling her forward toward answers that had waited so long to be found. The small church stood nestled among ancient oaks, their branches creating a natural canopy over the weathered headstones. Nicole parked her car and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. The afternoon sun filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows across the cemetery's peaceful grounds. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered the folder containing Evelyn's letters and the precious photographs. The baptismal record had led her here, to St. Michael's Episcopal Church, where Helen Collins, formerly Evelyn Dawson, had brought her daughter for sanctuary all those years ago. The church doors creaked as Nicole stepped inside. The smell of old wood and beeswax candles filled the air. A man in his early 60s, wearing a clerical collar, looked up from arranging hymnals. "Can I help you?" he asked warmly. "I hope so," Nicole said, her voice catching slightly. "I'm looking for information about someone who attended this church in the 1940s. Helen Collins and her daughter Elizabeth." The pastor's eyes lit with recognition. "Ah, you must mean Margaret. Elizabeth Margaret Collins. She went by Margaret. Please, come to my office." Nicole followed him, her heart beating faster. "Margaret? She's still alive?" "Oh yes," the pastor nodded, settling behind his desk. "She's at Riverside Care Home now, just 20 minutes from here. She was quite active in our congregation until her health began failing a few years ago." He pulled out an old parish registry, handling it with reverence. "Helen Collins. She passed away in 1987. But Margaret still receives communion when I visit the home. She's a lovely soul, though there's always been a sadness about her." Nicole carefully opened her folder. "I found these in an old cabin. They belonged to her mother, when she was still Evelyn Dawson." The pastor's eyes widened as Nicole explained the story. The hidden chest, the letters, the photographs that revealed a desperate young mother's bid for freedom. "My goodness," he whispered. "We always knew there was some mystery about Helen and Margaret's past, but she never spoke of it. Would you like me to call the nursing home? I could help arrange a visit." Nicole nodded, tears pricking her eyes. "Please, I think we're family." The next morning dawned clear and bright. Nicole drove to Riverside Care Home with the precious folder on her passenger seat, just as she had that night returning from the library. But this time, instead of fear and uncertainty, she felt hope blooming in her chest. The nursing home was a cheerful place, with flowering gardens and wide windows. A kind-faced nurse led Nicole to a sunny sitting room where an elderly woman sat in a comfortable chair, looking out at the garden. "Margaret?" the nurse said gently. "You have a visitor." Margaret turned, her silver hair neatly styled, her blue eyes, so like Evelyn's in the photographs, bright with curiosity. "Hello?" Nicole's throat tightened. "Hello, Margaret. My name is Nicole Dawson. I found something that belonged to your mother." Margaret's hands trembled slightly in her lap. "My mother? But nobody knows about." "About Evelyn?" Nicole said softly, sitting beside her. "About how brave she was?" Tears welled in Margaret's eyes as Nicole carefully opened the folder, showing her the photographs first. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth when she saw Evelyn's young face smiling up at her. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, my mother. I haven't seen her look so young in, I can hardly remember." Nicole gently laid out the letters next. "She wrote these to your father, but never sent them. She was afraid." Margaret nodded, tears flowing freely now. "She was always afraid. Even after we moved, after she changed our names, she would check the locks 3 times every night. She never told me everything, but I knew we were hiding from someone." "Your father's family," Nicole explained. "They tried to control her after he was declared missing in action." "She never remarried," Margaret said softly. "She worked so hard to give me a good life, but there was always this shadow over her. This secret she carried." She looked up at Nicole. "How did you find these?" Nicole explained about the cabin, about discovering her own family's connection to Evelyn's story. As she spoke, Margaret reached for her hand, holding it tightly. "All these years," Margaret whispered, "I thought no one would ever know the truth, that mother's sacrifice would be forgotten, that we'd just fade away, like we never existed at all. You existed," Nicole said firmly, squeezing her hand. "You survived, and your mother's courage. It's part of who we are." They sat together, these two women connected by a long-ago act of desperate bravery, and wept. Tears for Evelyn's fear and courage, For Margaret's lifetime of carrying an unspoken history, for the family bonds that had waited so long to be acknowledged. Margaret touched the photographs with trembling fingers, tracing her mother's young face. "I thought no one would ever remember us," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Nicole wrapped her arms around Margaret's thin shoulders, holding her close as they both cried. In that embrace was decades of silence finally broken, of family finally found, of a story at last complete. Through her tears, Nicole could almost imagine Evelyn watching them. The brave young mother who had sacrificed everything to protect her child, whose hidden letters and photographs had waited so long to bring her family back together. The spring sunshine streamed through the newly cleaned windows of the cabin, casting warm patches where Duke lounged contentedly on the floor. Nicole wiped sweat from her forehead as she worked the sandpaper over another weathered board, smoothing away decades of neglect. The fresh scent of pine sawdust filled the air, mixing with the earthy smell of Murphy's oil soap she'd used on the older boards they'd managed to save. "You know, Duke," she said, pausing to scratch behind his ears, "this place is starting to feel like home." Duke thumped his tail in agreement, watching as she moved to tackle the stone hearth. Years of soot had blackened the once beautiful river rock, but underneath all that grime, Nicole could see hints of warm grays and browns. She dipped her brush in the cleaning solution and began scrubbing, revealing the natural beauty one stroke at a time. The work was therapeutic, almost meditative. As she cleaned, Nicole thought about how much had changed in the few months since she'd impulsively bought this haunted cabin at auction. What had started as an act of desperate courage had led her to discover not just family history, but family itself. Every few days, she would visit Margaret at Riverside Care Home. They'd sit together in the sunny garden or the comfortable visiting room, sharing stories and piecing together their shared history. Margaret's memory was sharp, and she had so many tales about Evelyn, how she'd worked 2 jobs to support them, how she'd still managed to make holidays special even when money was tight, how she taught Margaret to be both strong and kind. "Mother never lost her grace," Margaret had said during one visit, her eyes distant with memory. "Even when we had almost nothing, she carried herself like a queen. But a kind queen, you understand? The sort who would give away her last piece of bread if someone else needed it more." Nicole treasured these stories, writing them down in a leather-bound journal she'd bought specially for this purpose. She wanted to capture every detail, every memory, every piece of the remarkable woman who had been brave enough to flee from oppression with her baby daughter. One particularly memorable afternoon, Margaret had asked the nurses to help her retrieve something from her room. When she returned, she was holding a small velvet box. "This was my mother's wedding ring," Margaret said, opening the box to reveal a delicate gold band with tiny engraved flowers. "She never took it off, not even after all those years. When she died, I couldn't bear to bury it with her. It seemed like it needed to keep telling her story somehow." Nicole gasped softly as Margaret pressed the box into her hands. "Margaret, I couldn't possibly." "Yes, you can," Margaret insisted gently. "You're the one who brought her story back to life. You're the one who found us, who understood what she did and why. This ring, it's not just about the marriage that was lost. It's about survival. About love being stronger than fear. You understand that better than anyone." Tears fell as Nicole carefully lifted the ring from its velvet nest. The afternoon light caught the delicate engravings, making them seem to dance. She could almost feel Evelyn's presence, as if the decades of love and courage that had flowed through this simple band of gold had left an imprint. Back at the cabin, Nicole continued her restoration work with renewed purpose. Each board she replaced, each window she repaired, felt like an act of healing. The space that had once felt haunted now felt blessed, as if Evelyn's spirit could finally rest, knowing her story would be told. Duke had stopped growling at shadows. The unsettling creaks and mysterious sounds had given way to the natural settling of a well-loved home. Even the trapdoor, once so frightening, was now just a reminder of the discoveries that had brought such meaning to Nicole's life. In the evenings, after the physical work was done, Nicole would sit at her desk by the window and write. She detailed everything: the auction, the mysterious chest, the letters and photographs that had led her to Margaret. She described Evelyn's courage, her sacrifice, her unwavering love for her daughter. The story flowed from her pen as if it had been waiting all these years to be told. "I want everyone to know," she explained to Margaret during one of their visits. "Not just about what happened, but about who she was. About how one person's bravery can echo through generations. Would you mind if I tried to publish it?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Mind? Oh, Nicole. Nothing would make me happier." Mother's truth was silenced for so long. It's time for her voice to be heard. As spring deepened into summer, the cabin's transformation continued, both inside and out. Nicole planted flowers in the beds that had long gone wild, bright zinnias and soft purple coneflowers that attracted butterflies. She hung wind chimes that sang gently in the breeze. The place that had once seemed forbidding now welcomed visitors with cheerful curtains and a fresh coat of paint on the front door. The iron-bound chest, now freed from its chains, held a place of honor in the living room. Nicole had carefully cleaned and restored it, bringing out the rich patina of the old wood. Inside, she kept Evelyn's letters and photographs, precious pieces of history that would never again be hidden away. One evening, as the setting sun painted the cabin's walls in warm gold, Nicole stood before the chest with Evelyn's wedding ring in her hand. Duke sat beside her, his presence steady and comforting. She thought about all the years this simple band of gold had witnessed. The love, the fear, the courage, the survival. She thought about Evelyn wearing it every day of her life, even after losing her husband, even after having to flee her home. It had been a reminder of who she was, of what she believed in, of the love that gave her strength to protect her child. Carefully, reverently, Nicole placed the ring in the chest, nestling it among the letters and photographs that told its story. As she closed the lid, she whispered softly, "Rest now, you're safe." The words seemed to fill the peaceful quiet of the cabin, a benediction for both the living and the dead. Through the window, the last rays of sunset touched the chest like a gentle hand, and all was still. The late summer breeze carried the sound of laughter through the open windows of the cabin. Nicole couldn't help but smile as she watched her daughter Sarah setting the table while her son Michael helped Margaret into a comfortable chair on the newly restored porch. Duke trotted between them all, tail wagging, as if making sure everyone was properly settled. "Mom, I still can't believe you turned this place around so quickly," Sarah called from inside. "Remember how scary it looked at that auction?" Nicole ran her hand along the smooth wood of the porch railing, remembering that day when $500 and a leap of faith had changed everything. The cabin's weathered exterior now gleamed with fresh paint, window boxes bursting, with colorful flowers, beneath sparkling clean windows. The inside was even more transformed, warm and welcoming, with Evelyn's restored photographs proudly displayed on walls that no longer held secrets. The whole town was convinced this place was haunted. Michael chuckled, bringing out a pitcher of lemonade. "Now look at it. It's the prettiest house on the road." Margaret's eyes crinkled with joy as she accepted a glass. "Evelyn, my mother, would have loved seeing it like this. Full of life again, full of family." The afternoon unfolded like a gift, with shared stories and easy laughter. The townspeople who once hurried past now stopped to wave, some even bringing welcome to the neighborhood dishes despite Nicole having lived there for months. The change in their attitudes was remarkable. Where once there had been fearful whispers about the haunted cabin, now there were admiring comments about resilience and restoration. "Mrs. Chen from the grocery store told me yesterday that you've inspired her," Sarah mentioned over dinner. "She said seeing you tackle this place helped her finally decide to renovate her grandmother's old house." Nicole felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer evening. The cabin had become more than just a home. It was a testament to courage, to facing the unknown, to choosing hope over fear, just like Evelyn had done all those years ago. "You know," Margaret said softly, reaching across the table to squeeze Nicole's hand, "when you first found me in that nursing home, I thought I was the last keeper of my mother's story. Now look at us, we're making new stories right here where hers began." After dinner, they gathered on the porch to watch the sunset paint the sky in brilliant golds and pinks. Duke settled at Nicole's feet, his watchful presence as steady as ever. Through the open door, she could see the chest in the living room, its lid open wide. Photographs and letters spilled out, catching the evening light. No longer hidden, no longer afraid. The townsfolk passing by waved warmly. Old Mr. Peterson from down the road even stopped to drop off a basket of fresh tomatoes from his garden. "Place looks real nice," he said, nodding approvingly. "Shows what a little courage can do." As the golden hour deepened into dusk, Nicole watched her family chatting and laughing on the porch. Sarah was showing Margaret photos on her phone, while Michael told stories that made them both laugh. Duke's tail thumped contentedly against the wooden boards. $500 at a county auction. That's all it had taken to start this journey, this adventure that had given her so much more than just a home. It had restored her faith in new beginnings, rebuilt her sense of family, and given her a place where she truly belonged. The sunset's last rays gilded everything in sight. The restored cabin, the happy faces of her loved ones, Even Duke's fur seemed to glow. Nicole sat back in her chair, feeling peace settle over her like a warm blanket. She looked at Duke and whispered, "We're not alone anymore." Inside, the open chest continued spilling its treasures into the golden light. Photographs and memories no longer hidden in darkness, but celebrated in the warmth of family and love. If even one moment stayed with you, hit subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story written gently for the heart.